what that threshold is will vary depending upon what you negotiate with your investors. Now, in most cases, a typical preferred return is what? What have you guys heard for preferred return?
7 or 8.
8, 7 to 12. Yeah, it really is kind of anywhere in that 7 to 12 range, 8 being the most common is what we're seeing on preferred return. So what this means is the investor gets 100% of the cash flow until they've reached an 8% preferred return. Until you get an 8% on your money, you get 100% of the cash flow. So you're in a preferred spot over the sponsor, us. We get none of the cash flow until the investors have achieved that hurdle. So the way that that's worded in a partnership agreement is it says like you'll have a partnership agreement will always, you'll have the operating agreement for the LLC, and it'll have a waterfall provision. It will show this is how you divide the profits. So this is the way that you would word this in a partnership agreement. You say, cash flow shall be distributed in the following order and priority. First, until the investors receive an 8% annual rate of return on their unreturned capital, the investors get paid on a pro rata basis. Pro rata basis means, if you invest $100,000 and you invest $100,000, you're getting 50 and 50 of the capital. If you do 200 and she does 100,000, you're getting 2/3 of the capital distribution. You're getting 1/3 of the capital distribution. So that's what the pro rata part means. And then second, that's when the profit split comes in. So you've got your preferred return, and then after that you have a profit split. So once you've achieved that 8% hurdle, in this case, you would get a 70% split of the profits, for example. And this is a pretty common waterfall split in multifamily syndications, where you'll have a preferred return, and then a waterfall, and then a profit split. Profit splits tend to start anywhere between 80% and can go to starters are anywhere between like an 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, with 80-20 and 70-30 being a lot more common than 60-40. So what is missing in this language?
Catch-up.
What is it?
Catch-up.
A catch-up. Oh, I hate those. I'm going to talk about catch-ups in a little bit. That is missing intentionally. The exit, by meaning what?
Proceeds.
Proceeds from sale. Well, it says that the investors get all of the capital until they've reached an 8% annual rate of return, and there's a 70-30 split. So any money from the sale would also be split the same way. But there is something missing here. Nope. What? Principal return. Where does the investor get their money back? So a waterfall can have a couple of different provisions. It can have one provision for this is what you're doing with the profit, but there also needs to be provision to say that the investor gets their money back. And that seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? But I actually had a partnership agreement once, and Bob will remember this. We had an investor call, and he goes, I read that partnership agreement. One thing, I don't get my money back. And we're like, oh, come on, And so I look at it, and I'm like, well, sure as hell. Somebody had deleted that. There's a separate sentence that will say, on a capital event, such as on the sale or on a refinance, the investor gets 100% of the proceeds of the sale or refinance until they've received all of their principal back. So this is a waterfall showing you what's happening to profit, but what about getting principal back? That needs to be a part of the partnership agreement as well, and you kind of don't want to forget to put it in there, even though it may seem pretty obvious. So in order to calculate a preferred return, the first thing you have to do is you have to track the capital account. And what that means is you have to track how much money was invested, and then you'll have your rate of return against that money. Does that make sense? And as payments come back to people for principal, like say you refinance, you return half the investor's capital, the preferred return drops by half, right? Because you're getting 8% on your unreturned capital contribution. So the first thing you have to do, the first step, is you have to track the capital. So here you have in year zero. Year zero means this is the time of investment. You've got $9,450,000 capital call. You started out with no money. That's the starting balance. We add $9,450,000. The ending balance is $9,450,000. That's the year zero. Nothing happens mathematically in year zero. Everything happens beginning in year one, because in year one is when you're going to start to begin to accrue preferred return. This thing is good timing. I don't know what it does. It just says an error has occurred. It doesn't actually go to sleep, there's just an error message that says an error has occurred, so. I know, but it's a Mac, right? All right, I got it back, so there we go. So the next step is, so I showed you, we already showed tracking the capital account, right? So the next thing that has to happen is, how much money is an 8% return on that capital? So that's the next calculation you have to make. So it's $756,000 a year. So now you have to track the preferred return, because remember, the investor gets 100% until they've reached an 8% return. So how do you keep track of that? You'll just do it in a simple spreadsheet. It's anything but simple, but you have a starting balance where they started out with no accrued preferred return. You see that right here. The next thing that happens, $756,000 goes in that year. The next thing that happens, there was $377,006 for distribution in year one. The investor got all of it. So what's left is $378,994 of remaining accrued preferred return that was not paid. So this is where things get confusing to some people, is they think, okay, if I have an 8% pref, that means that I get 8%, right? So every year I'll get paid 8% on my money. And it doesn't work that way. Instead, remember, a pref says, first, the investor receives all of the capital distributions until they reach an 8% return on their money. So all of the capital in year one was $377,000. So that money was distributed, and there's $378,994 that carries over to the next year. And you'll see that on the next column is the starting balance. Then another $756 gets added. The investor gets all of the cash. And then you have $580,000 at the end. So there's year one. There's year two. Year three, 378 starting, 756 goes in, 554 gets distributed because the top line, that's all there was. And then we have the sale. Now in the sale, remember we first have to return the investor's capital, right? That's that second sentence that we had left out of that waterfall language. So the first thing that happens here in this example is the investor gets their money back first. Then they get the next $1,336,000 because they get $580 that carried over from last year. They get $756 for their prep for this year. That's $1,336,000. That's what they get paid, and then there's $7,010,518 left that drops to the next tier where the sponsor and the investor start to split the money. Now, that was complicated, wasn't it? I'm going to stop there for a second and take questions, because I know that one's going to have a few. Yes?
So how did you get to $7 million when there's $7,500,000 left after?
So you started with $17 million at the top. You take $9,450,000, right? So now you've got what? You got $7 million-ish left. And then you get $1,336,000 goes to the investor. And then that leaves you with $7,010,518.
But then 580 gets added also.
Yes. Yes. That's how you get to the $1,336,000. You have to carry over your last year. And then you got to add in this year's $756,000. If let's say you break even and you sell, a break even means at the end there'd be $9,450,000, right? So the $9,450,000 would go back to the investors. Nobody splits anything. All of this accrued preferred return goes away. Because remember, they get 100% until they achieve an 8%. If 100% of nothing is nothing. So it's not a guarantee. And that's the difference between a pref and like debt, for example. You know, debt, you have to pay. Uh-oh, Ben has a question. I better take Joe's first.
What's so special about this 8% top that some institutions like? Is it magical?
Yeah, it's like, why 8%, right? Why not 6? Why not 7? Why not 9? It's market driven. You know, and it's always a negotiation, and so everything has a market price. And so preferred return is no different. It's always just a market price. And so that's kind of where the market is settled out. Is 8% is the most common preferred return that you see. Now, you'll see some institutions doing 10 prefs. You'll see that. And they might have sponsors that take that 10 pref, and that's the best deal they're going to get. It happens. Yes? Yes. Fees come out first, and then the cash flow is after fees. And the reason, especially when you have a preferred return, the sponsor of the deal is making nothing off the cash flow before they reach that pref hurdle. So the only income that sponsor is receiving is anything that you earn off of fee income. So fees come first, waterfall comes second. Ben, you had a question?
What you're describing is a cumulative preferred, obviously, where you're rolling
Yes.
the bill. Have you in the past done simple prep, or do you know people who do simple prep, and how do they get away with doing that and still being able to raise money?
Are you talking the difference between compounding it and non-compounding it? So this example that I showed you was a non-compounded pref because we didn't add pref on the accrued pref. So somebody asked me earlier, picking on you, are you going to give us the spreadsheet that calculates out the waterfall? I'm like, no. And the reason not is because there's like hundreds of different ways to structure the deal. You can have compounded pref, you can have non-compounding pref, you can have an IRR-based pref, you can have a cash-on-cash-based pref. We're going to go over some of that here. And there's so many nuances that you really have to create the spreadsheet around the language in your operating agreement, not the other way around. So we're raising money on non-compounded but cumulative pref. So there's no pref on the pref, but the pref does accumulate. And so if you don't get paid, let's say you get, there's 4% cash flow in year one, the investor gets a 4% return. Year two, there's an 8% cash flow, the investor gets an 8% return. Year three, there's a 12% cash flow, the investor gets 12% return, because we still owe them 4% from year one, remember? So, and then after that, there's another 12%, the investor gets 8, and then the other 4 gets split. And that's what this section is going to talk about, is that particular split, where we take the cash flow in the last year here, we subtract out the return of capital. We have $1,336,000 of pref left to pay because we had $580 plus $756, right? So that gets paid next. That leaves $7 million to drop to the next tier. In the next tier, in this example, was a 70-30 split. You simply multiply that remaining cash by the 70-30 split, and this is what the investor gets in total at the exit. So as you can see, kind of as you go across the bottom, you can see the investor, the last row here, the orange one, the investor invested $9,450,000. That's the money out. That's why it's negative. Year one, they got all the cash flow, $377,000. Year two, they got all the cash flow, $554,000. Year three, they get $15,693,000. So they got all the rest of their preferred return, and they got the 70% split of the cash flow, and they got their money back. And when you add all three of those together, they got $15 million. So they invested $9.5, they got back $15.5. So if you invested $100,000 in this deal, can you tell me exactly how much money you got back? Just like that? I heard yeah, 176,000. Because that's, I'll show you in a second how we got that fast. So, let's get that. So we had a 21.92% IRR and a 1.76 multiple. A 1.76 multiple means you got 1.76 times the cash you got back. So if you invested $100,000, you got back 176. So these two numbers here at the bottom, IRR and equity multiple, these are the primary performance indicators that a syndication investor is looking for, right? You're looking at what's the IRR, what's the equity multiple, and then last, what's the cash on cash return. Those are the three things that drive it. Some people, they'll say like, oh, what's the cap rate? And it's like, it doesn't matter. You know, the cap rate's not going to dictate what your return is going to be. Your return is going to be dictated by so many other different factors about the structure of the deal. and the performance and how much value add and all that different kind of stuff. So instead, we're looking at IRR, equity multiple, and cash on cash return. What you're looking for is you want to find a deal that fulfills your requirements. Like, how much return do you need? Do you need cash flow? Do you just need equity on the back side? You know, what is it that really works for you? And that's how you want to decide what you're going to, what the performance is of that deal. And a trap not to fall into is you don't want to fall into the trap of saying, well, I'm going to pick the deal that has the highest IRR or the one that has the highest multiple. Because before you get to that point, you have to dig into what the assumptions were that caused you to arrive at what those performance indicators are telling you. And just because one guy's saying 25%, another guy's saying 20%, doesn't mean the 25% is better if all of his assumptions are all checked out. So we can also calculate cash on a year by year basis. And so you should be doing that. You want to know what's your cash flow in each of the years. And remember, see, it's not always 8% equal to 8% preferred, right? We eventually get there, but it's not 8% cash on cash. There's a difference between 8% cash on cash and 8% preferred return. Two completely different concepts. I saw a question over here. Yeah?
As you say, why would you want to structure this, move the prep, for return? Because it's all cash flow starting it.
Yeah, great question. Why have a preferred return, right? Why not just do a 70-30 split and make it easy, right? And the reason is if you're raising a small amount of money, especially from relatively newer or even unsophisticated investors, they'll fund a 70-30 split deal kind of all day long in small increments. But if you're increasing the size of your business and you're raising a lot more money, the more sophisticated the investor, the higher their expectations. And one of the things that they want to see is that you've aligned your interest with theirs in some respect. And one of the ways that they want to see that is they want to see that you make absolutely no money unless they've made money on the money. So the prep is really just a fallback to prevent the sponsor from underperforming, yet walking away with a big payday, while they have their money tied up and earn a very, very small return. So it gives them kind of first call on that capital. Yeah?
But aside from the actual return, there are other funds or other payments that the syndicator is pulling out of the deal in terms of marketing fees and closing fees and so forth. So how do you put all those fees into a total return, kind of show the split? Or is it just 70-30 all after expenses?
So the waterfall is always after expenses, and the expenses are going to be a separate line item. So what you want to look out for, especially if you're investing in a syndication investment, is you want to look out for sponsors that hide their fees, right? I mean, you're going to charge a fee, and it's valid to charge fees. Just be upfront about it and show the investors exactly what those fees are and what they're paying. So you should be able to see that. It should be transparent. So you can see the cash flow from the asset level, go all the way down through expenses, all sponsor fees, then net cash flow after sponsor fees, and then it enters into the waterfall. So what we're showing here in this part of the deal structure is we're showing you post-fee dollars that enter into the waterfall, not deal level or asset level cash flow. And there is a difference. And one of the things to look for too, and I skipped over this a minute ago, is this is the IRR and the equity multiple on the asset level after fees. So you'll notice that the deal is throwing off a 27 IRR, the investor is getting a 21.92 IRR. So one of the ways you can tell if the investor is raking off too much is what's the difference between the gross, this is what we call the gross IRR, and the net IRR, which is the one at the bottom, which is what the investor is getting. And Bob, what are you hearing out there in the market of what people are accepting in terms of the delta between gross and net IRR?
$5.08%.
See why he works for me? So in general, if the spread between the two IRRs is like 8% or less, then it's generally accepted that that's kind of within market. If you have a greater difference of like, you have a 10% difference between the gross IRR and the net IRR, the sponsor's probably taking too much. So now let's talk about a tiered waterfall. This is where things get a little bit more complicated. Is there a light in the room? Anybody know? It's gonna be like nighttime in here pretty soon. Is it over here? Oh, sweet, thank you. Awesome, appreciate it. So a tiered waterfall, so what we talked about was, we just covered a waterfall that has a preferred return and one profit split. So now let's talk about kind of the next level up, where you have a preferred return and then you have two different waterfall splits. So this will probably come back up in a second. There it is. So now this language, kind of the same. We've seen this, right? First, the cash is 100% to the investors until they receive an 8% return. Then, that's the preferred return. So then next, we have 70% until the investors have received a 12% return. So now they get 100% until they get an 8, then they get 70% of the cash flow until they receive a 12, and the sponsor gets 30% of the cash flow. And then after a 12% return, then the sponsors and the investors split the profits 50-50. So the reason that this is kind of an interesting way to do a waterfall split is because if the sponsor really outperforms, they can be rewarded by getting a higher profit split. But if they don't, then the investor is rewarded because they're staying in lower tier. So this is kind of a trade-off between like, okay, well, we're thinking of doing an 8 pref to a 70-30, but gosh, we'd really like to get an 8 pref to a 50-50, or something like that. So how can we kind of, work both of those in there and make everybody happy? Well, let's create a second hurdle. And the way that you do that is kind of the same spreadsheet that we did for the preferred return. You now have to track a second block to track how much would be required to generate a 12% return. And you're going to accrue all of those dollars on the 12% side, just like you did on the 8% side. So here we have $377,000 goes in. The investor gets $377,000 for the preferred return. Then we are tracking the 12% hurdle. We started out with 0. It takes $1,134,000 to get that investor a 12% return. But they were paid $377,000 in pref, so we subtract that, and that leaves $756,000 left to accrue to the next year. And so it just works just like the 8% preferred. It just carries year to year to year, and the amount will grow and grow and grow. And then you'll see that by the time we get over here to year 3 and we go to sell, remember that $7,010,000 that we had left over after the preferred return? Well, instead of now getting split 70-30 like we did in the last waterfall, here what we're doing is we're applying it into this next hurdle. So the investor in this case is getting $5,390,518 because first they get the preferred return satisfied, then we satisfy the 12 all the way until there's $0 left, and then after that there's $5,390,000 to drop down to the next tier. That gets split here 50-50. So in this case the investor got $14,615,000. Now remember in the last one they got like $15,600. So the difference was it's about $1 million less to structure the deal this way than it did the other way. But what does that do to the return? Remember the net IRR on the previous slide?
21.6.
Yeah, 21.6. So in this case it's 19.14. So you would think that by having this split after a 12 and going to a 50-50 would like totally just obliterate the IRR, but it really only affected it by about 2 percentage points. Questions on that? The sponsor makes more, that's right. So in this case, the sponsors promote is the difference between what the investor made in the last deal, which was $15,600, and what they made in this deal, which is $14,600. The sponsor makes about an extra $1 million. And when they throw off a 27% gross return and a 19-14 net return, that's a really good deal for the investor. So if you incentivize the sponsor to do that, it's probably appropriate. Especially for 3 years. Yeah, right. You do it that fast. So then there's also a 3-tier waterfall. I cut all the math out of this one because it's just got to be too unwieldy. But a 3-tier waterfall is where first you have a pref, then you have a hurdle 1, then you have a hurdle 2, then you have a hurdle 3. And so this just creates kind of multiple levels to go through, and this is actually what we use. Thanks. This is actually what we use on ours, is a 3-tiered waterfall model. And it's really slanted towards the investor if the deal is kind of marginal, and it's really slanted towards the sponsor if the deal really outperforms. It's kind of a happy medium where, I've heard a lot of people go like, oh, I'm going to just do, I had a call yesterday from a sponsor that goes, I'm having trouble raising money. I'm like, what are your terms? He goes, well, it's 70-30 split. I said, what's the pref? He goes, pref. I'm like, well, that's not market, right? Market is an 8 pref and, some waterfall hurdles. And they were just basically getting from $1 a 70-30 split all the way from that first dollar, which is a really rich deal for the sponsor, not so much for the investor. I said, you're never going to raise money on that. It's just not market. So this is kind of a happy medium where, how do you kind of get into a 50-50 split tier without being unfair to the investor? Well, the best way to do that is to set a high hurdle rate that gets you there. So in this case, until an investor reaches a 15% return, we're not into a 50-50 split relationship. And to get a 15% return is pretty good. So it kind of is balancing those two things. Now, there's a lot of nuances in the way that these deal structures can work. Question from back.
On the previous slide, please.
What's that?
On the previous, yeah. How do you explain this to an investor? This structure?
Oh, man.
In simple terms.
Yeah. You want to answer that, Bob? They talked to Bob.
Hi, Bob.
So what we did is we created an exhibit. So we have when we put out a deal, we have like a 50-something page slide deck. I'm just like, yeah, I know, I wrote. We have like a 50-page slide deck that goes through the entire deal, and what Bob, 15 pages of it is probably financials. So Bob comes into my office, was it day before yesterday, he's cross-eyed. He's like, you gotta do something, there's too many these financial exhibits, we gotta do something, it's just, people are gonna go to sleep. And it's true, there's a lot to disclose, and we like to be very transparent, so we have everything in there. So what we did, and this was Bob's idea, I give him 100% credit for it, it's actually brilliant. We created a different slide deck that's called Understanding the Financials. And what we do is we extract out the key elements of the waterfall, the property level, operating statements, and the waterfalls. And just like we did here with circles and arrows, we're showing people how to connect the dots. Here's the rent we received from this apartment unit. Here's what it all totals out to be. Here's all the economic vacancies. Here's all the expenses, that's the income. That income goes over here to before fees cash flow. Here's the fees, there's the after fees cash flow, that enters into the waterfall. And then in the waterfall, here's the pref, here's the split, here's the split, here's the split. Now, unfortunately, these complicated splits do send people a little bit cross-eyed. So the way I tend to explain it, and Bob probably hates it when I do this because it's a real oversimplification, but I like to tell people, we structure ours so that investors get 100% of the cash flow until they get an 8% return. And then we start out with a 70-30 split, and then our split increases as our performance increases. And I kind of leave it at that. Because if you go into like, okay, here's how you accrue it, and then it goes, everything that we just did here, you saw it's a 1-hour class, imagine doing that with 80 investors, one at a time. That's why Bob's like, yeah, I'm on the phone all day. That's how difficult and challenging it is. So there will be some people that will say, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. There will be some people that will say, yeah, I'm used to it, I see it all the time, that's common in the market. And there will be some people that will go, okay, so how does this number get to here? And then how does that one calculate to here? Can I see the formula behind that? And with those people, we'll totally work with them and show them exactly how we arrive at all those different numbers. And it's just a personality thing, right? The engineers always are famous for that.
Is this relevant for deals that are only, let's say, 1 year in duration, or a couple of months, and did the hurdles sort of fall out, or the return fall out, and they're quicker?
So,
Like, when does it become this versus a flip?
okay, so you have to set your waterfall in the beginning. So you're going to have to figure, you can't go like, oh, we got out in a year, so all this doesn't apply. So this is all set ahead of time. So what is the strategy behind the 1 year deal? Are you buying a house, fixing up, reselling it within a year?
Let's
Or-
say it's a multifamily fix-up.
And that was the intent from the outset. So you're gonna flip a multifamily. You're gonna buy an apartment complex. You're gonna say we're gonna be in, we're gonna be out in 1 year. So if you're gonna do something like that, we did one of these. We were in and out in, well, it was 21 months. And we just said, this is gonna be a simple 73 split. No prep, there's no cash flow. We don't expect to have any anyway because it's totally underperforming. We're just gonna stabilize it. We're gonna be out 70-30, no wait, it was 60-40 split. 60-40 split. Then the investor got a 42 IRR, with no prep. So again, it goes back to, there's as many ways to structure a deal as there are deals, and each one kind of has its own nuances about what's going to work best. And, in that case, I think a lot of this would just get confusing to people. And it also depends on the size of the deal. If you're raising $1 million, it's going to be fairly easy to raise $1 million with a simple split structure like that. But if you're raising 20 million, it's going to be a long road without a pref. And so you can also think of a pref as a fallback to say like, okay, it's a 73 split, but we want to make sure that you get at least 8% return. That's what a pref is really doing. And I'm going to talk in a minute about a twist on a pref that we did on one of our deals. Yeah.
Have you gotten the structure at that size?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Bigger.
This is
Bigger. We're doing one right now, 42 million with 13 million equity.
it's much better than PE. Okay.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Much private equity, yeah. It's not a 2 and, what is it, 2 and 10 or 2 after hurdle. Yeah. So some nuances. Let's take a look at, here's language from a waterfall here. And we've seen this before, right? And remember what was missing? The principal repayment was missing, right?
Right.
Does everybody agree? Does anybody disagree? Are you sure? Ben? So this is another component of deal structure that makes it so confusing. There are literally so many different ways you can structure a deal. And this looks almost identical to the way I showed you before.
Right.
Well, before, there's one word that's different. What? Unreturned was in there. What? Internal rate of return. And, okay, so the other one, remember I said it was annualized rate of return, right? So this one has internal rate of return.
That includes.
What?
Internal rate of return includes return of capital.
Why? How? Well, it's by definition, right? You cannot achieve an 8% internal rate of return without getting the money back. Try running it through a spreadsheet and use Excel's IRR calculation and try getting to an 8% IRR without returning the capital. You cannot get there. So if the waterfall reads in the partnership agreement internal rate of return instead of annual rate of return, by definition, return of capital is included in the pref tier. So this means that there's no profit split until the investor gets their money back and they get the 8% split, or 8% preferred. The sponsor gets nothing. So in the last deal, if you got to the 8% hurdle, the sponsor could start splitting in cash flow, right? Because then you jump into the 70-30 tier. But if it's calculated off an IRR, now they cannot. Now, after you reach that 8% pref, the rest of the money goes to the investor as return of capital until all their capital is returned. So one word changes the whole mathematics in the spreadsheet. That's why I can't give it to you. Because it's different. So what has to happen is you have to make sure that the Excel model is mimicking exactly what the language is in the partnership agreement. So this is the difference between the two. These are the same exact provision. It's just one has the word annual and the other has the word internal. That was the only difference. So we have an annualized return hurdle out. This is the, remember that three-tiered waterfall I showed you a minute ago? That had, 8%, then what was it, 70-30 to a 12, 60-40 to a 15, and then 50-50 after that. These three calculations I'm going to show you are all using the exact same waterfall splits, but they're going to be different. So when somebody says, oh, it's an 8, and then it's a 70, and then it's a 30, there's more to the story that you want to know if it's the same deal or a different deal. So this is on an annualized return, which is just simply taking the capital times the hurdle rate. So you had 9,450,000 times 8%. That's your preferred return. The next one you have to wait for me to restart whoever's computer this is. At least I got good at it now. I know what the button sequences are to get it to go back. Okay, so I'll get to the next one. So the next one, this is an IRR waterfall. So this is the same exact terms, same exact waterfall, except now the pref, the hurdle rates are calculated off IRR instead of annualized return. So you'll notice that the IRR jumped from 19.51 to 19.72, and the investor got an extra $1,000. They went $100,000, investor got an extra $1,000. They went from 1.66 multiple to 1.67 multiple. Now this is using a geometric calculation of IRR, and there's two different ways to calculate IRR. There's a geometric, and there's an arithmetic method of calculating IRR when you're forecasting on a monthly basis. So this one, using the arithmetic method, is a 20.01 IRR. So same exact waterfall, same exact cash flow results in 3 different IRRs and 3 different equity multiples to the investor. So the point isn't here that one is necessarily better than the other. The point really is, are they calculating it the way that it says in the partnership agreement? So again, IRR isn't created equal. This is the IRR calculation in Excel, right? So you put your cash flows in, it gives you your IRR. And then you have, if you're calculating by the month, you do your first month to your last month, multiply by 12, that's your IRR. This is the geometric method, and so the idea here is make sure they agree. And so here's a kind of interesting story. Our corporate controller used to work for one of the largest multifamily syndicators in the country. They had tens and tens of thousands of units, and she got put on a special assignment. This was just shortly before she came to work for us. Her special assignment was she had to go through every operating agreement of all of their deals and compare every operating agreement to the waterfall to make sure that they match. Mind you, this is one of the largest shops in the country. What do you think the failure rate was?
30%.
90.
Well, over here.
90.
I heard 50, I heard 90?
90.
95% of their waterfalls did not match their partnership agreement. And so her job was she had to go back and reconstruct all of these waterfalls to match the partnership agreements and recalculate the investor's distribution.
Wow.
So get this right from the outset, and it will save you tons and tons and tons of headaches, trust me. So some other nuances of waterfalls. You can have the preferred return and then return of capital, even on an annual rate of return. So we already learned that if it's an internal rate of return, first thing that happens is they get to their 8% or whatever it is. Next thing that happens, any money after that goes to return of capital, just by definition because it says IRR. And one thing that'll always make you laugh is when they'll say first to an 8% IRR, second to return of capital. It's redundant, right? It just tells you that they missed the point that IRR by definition includes return of capital. You'll see it in partnership agreements. Sometimes they just add it just for clarity so people don't ask the question. Nevertheless, you can also have an annualized return hurdle and have the next hurdle, instead of dropping to the 70% tier, you could have the next hurdle revert to return of capital. Say now the investors get their money back. Or another trick, and this one's even more common, is you'll see sponsors will say, first you get return of capital, and then you get your 8% preferred. Does that make a difference to you? How?
There's no sharing of that, your profit is based on the percentage of your capital.
On return cap.
They're still gonna get their split, they'll still get their split, but the trick is, the investor gets less pref. Because every payment that you make to the investor reduces the capital account, which reduces the preferred return on the next month's preferred return calculation, right? You got $1,000 back, you have $1,000 less, earning 8%. Even though the distribution didn't change at all, the overall preferred return went down to the investor, and the total amount that they'll receive through the life of the investment, which is their equity multiple, will go down if you have return of capital first. Now, if you have return of capital second, after preferred return, then that's different. Or if you have an IRR-based waterfall, it won't matter, because those two capital flows are mixed together. So just another one of the nuances to consider. Uh-oh. Okay, so the next one is you can have return of capital first and pref, we talked about that. Return of capital only on a capital event. And this is how we do ours when we're doing an annualized return waterfall, is we'll have a second waterfall for capital events. And a capital event is what? Refinance and a sale, right? So if we do a refi, we get cash out, the investor gets 100% of the refi proceeds until they've received their capital back or until there's no more money. And then on the sale, same thing, they get 100% of the proceeds from the sale until they get all their money back, and then the rest of the money flows into the waterfall. And then a catch-up provision. I think you mentioned a catch-up provision. So a catch-up provision is another kind of tricky area around a pref. And what a catch-up provision is it will say the investor gets 100% of the return until they reach an 8%. Then the sponsor gets 100% of the return until the sponsor has earned the same amount of money that the investor had earned up to that point. And then after that, there's a split. Let's say it's 70-30. Now the effect of this is what they're really doing is they're creating a 70-30 split. But if the performance is so low that it dips down into the 8 to 15% range, the investor is getting some preferred position. We used a catch-up provision one time. I hate them, so normally I don't use them. But we used a catch-up provision one time. And the time we did it was when I very first started this presentation. I talked about our Rebuild Sonoma Fund, right? And to build these homes, we had a 55-45 split. So what we did say to the investor, look, we want to make sure you're getting paid something for your money. If for some reason these houses don't sell at the prices that we think, we're going to give you a little bit of a preferred position, but this really is intended to be a 45-55 split. So we're going to give you a 10% preferred, then there's a 10% catch-up. So that way, assuming that we get a 20% return, it's truly a 55-45 kind of relationship. But if we just developed a 10% return for our investors, the investors are getting all 10. And when you do that catch-up, you can do it in a lot of different ways. We did ours as a 50-cent catch-up. So instead of us getting 100% until we got fully caught up, we got 50% of the cash flow until we were caught up, and then the 45-55. Actually, we got 75. So it was 50% of the other 50%. Anyway, it gets confusing, but the whole idea was it gives the investor a floor. And then, of course, there's fees. Now, sponsors you saw in here, when we looked at some of these spreadsheets, the cash flow to sponsor is 0 for a lot of the hold period in most of these investments. So how do they keep the lights on? How do they pay staff, or how do they pay their office rent or their phone bill? Well, they charge a variety of different fees. So the first fee that the sponsor will usually get is an acquisition fee. Acquisition fees range from 1 to 3% usually of the purchase price. I've seen them as high as 4.5%. It seems a little high to me. I just saw a deal last night. Somebody showed me it was a 3% acquisition fee, but it was like a $25 million deal. So the acquisition fee was like $800,000 on a $25 million deal. And really the rule kind of is, as the size of the deal goes up, the acquisition fee as a percentage should be going down. The way we structured ours was we charge 2.5% of the first $10 million of purchase price, and then after that, it's 1% of any portion of the purchase price that exceeds $10 million. So it kind of gives you a a little bit of a larger percentage on smaller deals, but a smaller percentage on larger deals. And then sometimes we'll have an institutional partner, and we'll have a negotiated acquisition fee, and it might be a flat 2% or a flat 1.5%, just depending on the size of the deal. So you'll see a variety of different things there. Finance fees range between 0 and 1% of the loan amount. That's for the sponsor to guarantee the loan. Sometimes some sponsors are farming out their guarantees, where they're saying you have to have a net worth equal to the loan amount, and you have to have cash reserves of like 6 months or whatever. So they might pay somebody else, hey, I want to borrow your balance sheet to get on our loan, and they'll give them a fee, or in some cases the sponsor, we do our own. So I'm the guarantor on all ours. Development fee, if they're building something, a percentage of the construction cost, and that can vary wildly depending upon what they're building and what it costs. Let's see, next one is construction management fees. If you're doing a value add, you might charge a fee on the value of the repositioning of the actual construction that you do. Asset management fees are always 1%. Everybody's always 1%, right? But the question is 1% of what? And this does make a difference. And nobody ever says. So it could be 1% of the gross income. It could be 1% of the purchase price. It could every year. It could be 1% of the debt plus equity. It could be 1% of the equity. What is it? So we always want to ask that question when it says there's a 1% asset management fee. 1% of what? Ours are 1% of gross income, which is the lowest of all the different methods of calculating them. And then property management is market rate, so it just depends on what they're managing. And sometimes the property management is going to a third-party management company, and sometimes it's going to an in-house management company. It could be one or the other. And then disposition fees, 1 to 2%. Sometimes you'll see them, sometimes you don't see them. They should be smaller as the size of the deal gets bigger, and sometimes you don't see them at all. Questions?
How do you decide which IRR method to sell out in the partnership agreement? Do you model each one of those?
I do.
That acquisition?
Well,
or those 4 acquisitions?
I already know which one's going to produce which result. So the highest result for the sponsor is going to be an annual return-based waterfall. The next highest is going to be a geometric IRR, and then the lowest is going to be an arithmetic IRR. But the differences could vary wildly depending upon when there's a refinance. I mean, it could be such a minimal difference you don't notice, but it could be fairly substantial. But generally, they're relatively small. But we model it all different ways. We have one in the back, and then yeah.
If Praxis puts in any sort of capital into the deal, does it go the same as the investors in that tranche?
You know, historically we have done that. There's another way to do it too, where the sponsor goes in as an unpromoted divided interest. And what that does, it actually reduces the split to the investor. We don't do it that way, although that can be done. So far, we've always just gone in just like any other investor and just participated in the same waterfall.
Are you and your company personally funding the EMD and the due diligence? I'm assuming you haven't raised the money up until that point.
Right, yeah, we are. So, you know, right now we have $650,000 hard on our deal that we're in contract with right now. That's all our funds.
Can you pull that out and raise your money?
We pull it out after we raise it. That's right, that's how we get reimbursed. So, you know, I always say that, you know, the sponsor's money, you know, is the spark, and the investor's money is the fuel. So, you know, we use our money to get the EMD, due diligence, third-party inspections, lender deposits, all of that stuff that has to be paid for to get the deal to closing. And then when the investors invest, if we're going to leave money in the deal, we can either reduce our reimbursement or we can invest separately. One day that I've invested is through a self-directed IRA, and we got away with it. And I say that might be self-dealing, but I was able to calculate a low enough percentage to myself that they let me do it. I gotta go, Chad. deal, that money's gone. And that's one of the risks of being a syndication sponsor is, this is a risky business for us too. And, you know, we're taking the first risk. We've walked away from, we had a deal in Southern California, thank God, we only needed like, 25 grand or something. We had another one, we had two. And then another one, I think we were out like 35 grand.
Tucson.
Yeah, Tucson. Yeah, just because, you know, we found, you know, the roofs were shot. We couldn't tell that until we got on it afterwards into due diligence, and then we had third-party inspections. So we didn't lose any EMD, so we lost money from the third-party inspections that we paid for. Which obviously not you. That's right, it did. I got one here, and then I got one right here.
When you said guaranteeing the loan and taking and there's a fee for that, does that mean that Praxis as a company is guaranteeing the loan, or does that mean Brian Burke is personally signing outside of bad boy carve-outs, or
The whole thing, yeah.
the whole thing?
Yeah, so I'm signing on, so all of the loans that we're doing at the size that we're doing are on non-recourse borrowing.
Okay.
So I'm not signing recourse on the principal, I'm signing recourse on all the bad boy carve-outs. And for those of you who don't know what a bad boy carve-out is, it's basically saying the loan is non-recourse to the sponsor. If the lender had to foreclose and they lost the money, their only recourse is the property. They can't come after me personally for repayment of the debt. But what they can come after me for is if I abscond with the property tax money or the rehab money, or I commit fraud in the application process, or any of those types of things that is recourse, that would be recourse to me personally. And I do sign on those carve-outs personally, not as a company, but as an individual. Yeah.
For someone sort of just getting started in this, as you're doing this syndication, how would you structure it? Do you think you have to have sort of a full-time other job? That's where you're paying for keeping the lights on?
You need multiple streams of income, is my opinion. I'm sure there's a lot of different ways that people have tackled this. You know, I was very fortunate that as I was building the multifamily syndication to a larger scale, you know, we had a pretty active house flipping business at the time. Then we had our buy and holds that we sold over the last 2 or 3 years too, and you know, and other business-related income. So it's you either want to have another business or you want to have a job. Now, the hard part about that is now you're balancing, you know, sourcing deals and sourcing capital with sourcing living expenses. And it's a very difficult balance to balance, and it takes a long time to get there. It's probably the biggest challenge, I think. Yeah.
Can you talk about the terms on your current deal that you're coming out? Terms of the loan?
The terms of the loan, yes, that I can talk about. They know I can't, but I can talk about the terms of the loan. We're doing a bridge loan, which is LIBOR plus 3.1, so it's about a little over 5.5% interest, and it's floating rate. And I like floating rate because there's very little prepayment penalty. I get out for 0.5%. If you do a fixed rate loan in large commercial, it's not like a 30-year amortized fixed rate loan on your personal residence that you can pay off anytime you want for no penalty. In the commercial space, the prepayment penalties are extreme. We're buying a deal right now where the seller is paying about $1.5 million to prepay their loan. And if they would have gotten a floating rate loan, they would have been out for about 120 grand. So we try to stay away from the fixed rate debt. So typically floating rate, somewhere between 75-ish% of value is where we try to stick to. We've done some that are lower and some that are higher. I had a question right there. Yeah.
Wanted to ask more about how do you secure, or what do you do if the market goes down or the asset doesn't perform? So how do you kind of like maybe secure the investors' money or have that conversation with them?
Boy, that's a tough conversation to have. Want me to tell you a story?
There's drinks upstairs.
I'll tell you a quick story. This happened to me in 2008. I bought a property and then it was 80% occupied. I got it to 99% occupied. About a week later is when all the economic news about Bear Stearns and Merrill Lynch or what was it, Bob? Lehman, they all collapsed and the economy went in the toilet. And within 6 months, that property was at 99% occupancy and went to about 65% occupancy. And so, half the units were empty and the other half weren't paying. And so, what are your choices? The choices are you can go to your investors and say, you gotta give me more money because we gotta make the mortgage payment. The other choice is you can hand the keys to the bank and say, this didn't work out. Investors, you lost your money. Neither of those two were phone calls I was particularly excited about making. So instead, I just reached into my bank account and struck a $15,000 check to make the mortgage payment. And I thought that might last a couple months, but it lasted 3.5 years. And I made that check, I wrote that check every month for 3.5 years. By the time the performance came back and the economy came back, I had more money in that deal than my investors did. But ultimately, it came back, and we sold it kind of the next market cycle peak, quote unquote. And we got enough money out of that deal for me to get paid back the money I loaned interest-free to the entity to make the mortgage payment. The investors got all their money back, and we paid off the loan, and they got a little profit. It wasn't a big one, it was like 2-point-something%. So when you look at our track record, we show it. They always say, I thought look at the sponsor track record and see how good they did. They're always leave their worst deal off. We put our worst deal on there because this is our biggest selling point. We survived this thing. And, so this is where the sponsors need to be willing to take the bullet for their investors. And some of them will and some of them won't. And we as sponsors take risks in this business. And so I would say be prepared to take risks with your own money if you have to. And protect your investors like you protect your own life if you can. Yes.
Thanks so much, Brian. And please, Brian,
If you liked Brian Burke, then do me a favor and stay afterwards. We're going to do testimonials for future meetups.